Here's a little cluster which I would call distancing. These are strategies, and we're going to say they're storylines which are based around pushing something a long way away. One thing is, with this storyline is, climate change is a global problem. You see, you believe in climate change, do you? Lots of people say climate change is a global problem. When it comes to local, dog poo is a local problem. If we frame climate change as a global problem, we can keep it at arm's length. Therefore, talking about polar bears is, of course, a disaster, because that means we're talking about it as an issue far away. But I would not say that environmentalists are immune to this desire to distance something. The metaphors of something like polar bears do not simply come because environmentalists love polar bears. It also comes from, like everyone, they're bound by a need to manage and to some extent distance themselves from this. Here we see, for example, that there's almost an exact switch from people on the left-hand side. There we're seeing that 60% of people are saying that climate change will have not very much effect or no effect at all on them during their lifetimes. But if they're asked how much effect will it have on future generations, immediately it switches to a resounding 89%. This is, I have to say, in defiance of the evidence of a science, which is showing this is moving very fast and is already well underway. People are choosing to frame this as an issue which is, this is a distancing strategy. It's far ahead and in the future. Therefore, it doesn't have to be dealt with. The key one of these kind of like storylines emerging now, which is very powerful, is that everyone has become an expert on East Asian power generation. The lady in the lady, I guess she's in her 70s, who runs my local cat sanctuary charity shop, was telling me that there wasn't any point doing anything about climate change because the Chinese are building a coal-fired power station every 4 days. It's a remarkable level of expertise for a small mid-Wales town. And it exists because this is a storyline which is now a very powerful and dominant storyline. The next thing I want to talk about as a strategy is compartmentalizing. Compartmentalizing enables us to take on board climate change, to say, yes, there's a problem, like 85% say, this is a huge problem, but somehow, and I have to say this gets ingenious, to keep this separate from the causes of climate change. Here's a classic case. This is a wonderful one. This is from The Independent. This is from a Saturday issue of The Independent. A 3-page story about how climate change is destroying the Alps and the alpine ecosystems. Alpine tourism is at risk. It said that alpine tourism had maybe 25 years left before it goes under, because there won't be any snow left. So this is a 3-page story, the front page of The Independent. Shake your Independent, and out falls the travel supplement. You have to laugh or cry. And how extraordinary that these things can exist in separate categories in people's minds. Now, we can say, oh, it's The Independent, that's newspapers. But newspapers know their audience. They know that the people reading The Independent, A, are concerned about global issues. Maybe not local, but global. They're globally concerned, liberal-minded people. Secondly, they like skiing holidays. The two things can be put together in one box. Sometimes, amazingly, you find them, this is from the Guardian website, you find these things sitting in immediate juxtaposition. I must say, as somebody who has completely absorbed climate change into my worldview, I find this staggering. But I think it just goes to show the extraordinary lengths to which people can compartmentalize different points of view or different attitudes. One of the things, of course, they're doing is they're reframing the causes of climate change to ignore flying. And this is a very common issue, especially amongst, shall we say, environmentally minded liberals, who are also people who are very interested in travel, who like the world, who want to get out and see it, often better off too, but they will treat flying as a leading cause of climate change as somehow separate or independent from the climate change that they're so concerned about. If we can reframe climate change as something which is a challenge, but one which could make a better world, a more positive world, and one which we can maybe even personally benefit from, that this is a way of framing it in a way which is actually progressive, deals with it, and moves forward. That's how I see it. Personal advantage of climate change to me is I get to talk to all of you, I have a great job, I'm doing something I care passionately about. And this is very common for people working on the issue, but they see it as an opportunity for themselves to do something which they find personally validating. There are other forms, of course, of, shall we say, somewhat more aberrant personal advantage. This is one which is very common, this idea that indeed climate change, yes, climate change is happening, gosh, it's going to get warm, but it could be good for us. This again is strangely from The Guardian. The Guardian is very, very prone to this kind of thing. That's Blackpool, in case you didn't recognize it. The theories I showed you is that if you tell people that they can unplug their mobile phone charger and that would be good for the planet, you're getting them on the beginning of a steady escalator towards more lifestyle change. Of course, that is a fundamental misunderstanding of human psychology, because what actually happens in many cases, not all, but in many cases, is that people then adopt that as a kind of personal ethical offset. In other words, they say, right, I do this form of behavior, I'm doing my bit, I'm doing the thing I'm told to do. Here is again a result of focus group research trying to get to the bottom of it, finding that people who had highly polluting lifestyles had a very strong tendency to adopt marginal tokenistic environmental behaviors as a means to justify their behavior. There is another growing form of storyline which I would say is outright cynicism, if not positive nihilism. This is from an advertising campaign for diesel jeans. My prediction is that this will be a growing form of social storyline, especially with younger people. This is one which I think is, again from The Guardian, which I think is a form of cynicism which I find absolutely unspeakable. But I think we're going to be seeing more and more of that. I mean, there's a reason why there's now a whole lot of bestsellers called, 100 Things to Do Before You Die. There seems to be some real social zeitgeist around this. And this is something directly taking on environmentalists and environmental concerns. There will be a great deal more of this coming in the future, I predict. This is an advert for Ford Endeavour, in which the car has single-handedly destroyed the Arctic, and there, as if to underline the fact that this is making, I think, a comment on environmental concerns, as you can see, there are the little polar bears stranded on the iceberg. Finally, there is this tendency to reframe climate change as something where the science is unsettled or unsure. That means you can say, yes, climate change is a problem, but it's not that big a problem. It's a way of undermining the urgency. Climate change is too complex and uncertain for scientists to make useful forecasts. In other words, yes, it probably is happening, but you know what? We need more information. The final thing I should say is one of direct denial of the science. This, I'm afraid, we're going to be seeing a great deal more of. This is from the Daily Express, as you can see. What is interesting about the active denial is that where most of these storylines are appearing as a reaction to the information of climate change, the attitude behind this is one which is highly proactive. That is to say that many of the people who are actively denying climate change have sought it out as an issue because, for political reasons, they wish to oppose it. And that's a consistent policy, that's a consistent position for many of the people who are climate skeptics. This then works its way through into social attitudes in forms like this. As you can see, the majority of people believe that many leading scientists argue that climate change is happening. This is a very, very powerful social norm at the moment, and one which is constantly repeated. The power of the Great Global Warming Swindle as a documentary, I suspect, was not because of the number of people who watched it, who was relatively small, but because they then went and in the pub and in conversations in the workplace, they said, "Did you see that documentary on telly last night?" I had 3 conversations in pubs following Great Global Warming Swindle. It turned itself from a polemic propaganda documentary into a piece of social norm creation, which was readily accepted by people who wanted to hear it. So, I've just listed all of these. This is kind of some of the ones I've gone through. There's a tendency to cluster, but the point I wanted to make is these are in a state of constant change and flux, of constant negotiation. This is not the end of it. We're going to be seeing more and more of these. What worries me is that over time they will tend to consolidate and become reinforced as clusters, because people are likely then to hold on to a set, and once they have them, then reinforce those through their interactions both with individuals and the behavior that they express. In other words, if you believe climate change is not happening, then you have a complete carte blanche for environmentally, so we say climate destructive behavior, then doing that in turn is likely to reinforce your position. It becomes a constant loop. And the big question, which fascinates me, is what happens from here on? Because there is no knowing, having already set all of these little storylines up and they're all whizzing around, there's no knowing how actually we're going to settle, how we're going to group, what new ones are going to form, but also how, given that it's clear that we're dealing with this in a socially filtered manner, how socially we will filter the increasing evidence of a destruction which is caused. Clearly we may have people going, gosh, this is a real problem, I need to do something, and we will see more of that. I believe we will see increasing kind of like nihilism, And I think also there's a very big chance that if the science starts telling us we are beyond the point of no return, I think we could open up the box for a whole range of utterly aberrant responses. Some of which may be utter despair and a kind of, like last-minute self-seeking behavior, but some of which might go in who knows what direction in forms of like, aggressive scapegoating, projection, pushing this onto other people, other issues which actually have nothing to do with climate change as a personal response. So I'd say the big, very interesting challenge for us all, just to end on, is how does our information understanding of how humans both individually and collectively psychologically engage with this inform any predictions we might have about where we go from this point on? Thank you.